That's good. So it's been one of those mornings already, so I'll take all the help I can get. So hopefully everybody is here for Weed What Streamline Your Collection. That's what we are going to talk about today. I know sometimes it's a very touchy topic. I'm going to switch screens right here. Another attempt at being fancy. So hopefully okay, it looks like everything. And hopefully, if you all are new to joining us, that you can hear me okay. So, we're going to go ahead and get started. And it's been a long time since I've presented anything, so I'm a little rusty. But like I said, I got Kathy here to keep me hopefully in line. So, um, now, weeding, I have an ongoing battle with someone here that I work with. I like to throw things away. The person that and it's not Kathy. She's good about throwing some things away, but it's somebody else I work with likes to keep everything. I'm constantly getting in trouble because I delete files and think that we don't need them anymore, and sometimes we do. So, as you can tell, I am a big proponent of weeding, but sometimes you can go a little crazy on it. So, what we're going to try today on our to do list here is kind of define what weeding is, why we do it, and we're going to talk about trying to develop a plan for weeding. And weeding is kind of the familiar term that we use in library land. The more formal term for it is deselection. So weeding is probably one of those things we use that term with each other, coworkers, but probably when you're speaking to people in the community, things like that, you might not want to call it weeding. You might want to call it deselection. So we're going to talk about deciding what to weed, then how to actually weed, and then what to do with those items that we no longer are going to have in our collection. And that's usually where things go south. So the first thing I have here is kind of a thing. It's a little long. Y'all can kind of skim through it, but it's this editorial that Ms. Dorothea Dorans from Berkeley, California, wrote in response to this gentleman's Art of Weeding, and it's the one called Weeding Accountability. So y'all just kind of read through there, just skim it real quick, and let me know what you all think about what Ms. Doreen's has to say. Now, the background of this was, of course, Alameda County. They in Berkeley got into some trouble with when they decided to weed their collection. Kind of, the public took a little bit of a different take on the library's view of what they did with the weeded materials. So, y'all just kind of give me a raised hand or a done in the chat when you all are done reading it. Y'all go ahead and chat in. Do you agree with Ms. Doran's? Are you kind of in the middle? Do you totally disagree with her? So just kind of wanting to get your all's take on this particular situation. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to do that. So I know it's a lot of reading, and hopefully it's readable on your all screen. And we'll go into a little bit of kind of the reasoning for weeding or deselection is to make sure that the library materials that you have in your library are useful, they're accessible, and that they reflect what your community wants and needs and what your library goals are as well. All right, thank you all. All right, anybody want to offer their opinion on whether the library should have kept all of those? Should it have been a repository for every single thing? Never throw anything away, keep it all. Okay. Julia says she's in the middle. So, yes. And sometimes if something is weeded I don't agree with, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Yeah. Glenda, you're right. The library needs to be aware, and it's a fine line, between doing what you need to do and also making sure that you do not upset your public too much. So y'all go ahead and keep on. Yes, space issues are a real factor. If you don't have the money or the space to expand, you've got to do something. So we're some good things brought up. We'll talk about this. So we'll go ahead and go now. Like you said, every library, as you all know, is different. You have to, kind of know your community, know what you can and can't do. Um, but I kind of like this quote here that libraries exist to make information available, not to warehouse unused books. So, yeah. Yeah, you don't want to throw it all away, but you can't, as you all know, y'all can't keep everything. So we're going to try to talk about weeding and try to figure out a somewhat smart way to do it. So it is necessary, though. So we talked a little bit about what is weeding. Also, like I said, more formal term for it is deselection. And it is a process for removing books and also materials that no longer fit within the collection guidelines, are in poor condition, or are outdated. And this also includes electronic materials. You are able to weed some of those. I know that we've brought up this issue with the Kentucky Libraries Unbound Consortium and also with Overdrive about weeding that. And I don't know if we really have a whole lot of control over that. But if you have some of your own electronic collections, you might have a little bit of control over that. We'll talk about that in a little bit, how you can possibly weed electronic materials as well. So thank you all for commenting. See, I'm trying to talk and look at your all's comments at the same time. So, all right, now we're gonna try to give you some good reasons about why you should do it. So, and one of the reasons is making room for new material. I know someone made a comment about space. As you all know, if you can't expand your library space, you only have a set area that you can house your materials. So if you have new stuff coming in and you have, already stuff on the shelves, you're going to have to do something to get that new material on there. So, also accessibility. You want your patrons to be able to go to the shelves or whatnot and find what they need to without having to go, root through a whole bunch of stuff that might be torn, out of date, that really doesn't need to be on the shelves anymore. It's okay to take that stuff off the shelves. It's not serving anybody. Also, it would encourage browsing more. If your shelves are weeded, people can kind of browse through the books easily, not worry about books falling off on them, everything packed in the shelves so tight that they can't really get to anything. And it is good to keep your collection current and useful. I mean, I know it's hard, even though you have a book that you paid money for, you want somebody to hopefully check it out since you spent money on it. But if it's not something that's useful for anybody, it still doesn't do you any good sitting there on the shelf. And that's kind of where, we'll talk a little bit later, collection development policy comes in. And I've done this before when I was an acquisitions librarian. Yeah, you do buy duds. You buy duds that you think, people are going to love, it's great, and nobody ever touches it. And that's okay. It's something you don't want to do all the time, but it happens occasionally. And that's okay, is after it sits there for a while, no one checks it out, it's okay to repurpose it. So, then maintain accuracy. You don't want things in your collection that are so out of date that in some cases, like legal and medical, they actually can be, at least medical-wise, can become dangerous. And then, of course, with weeding, you can highlight the good stuff. You can, patrons can easily see the really great new books that you have in your collection. And also, in some instances, it can increase circulation because people can find things um, easier. And I'm going to make sure I'm not skipping over anything in my notes as well. So like I said, usually, like I said, sometimes if you can look at your shelves, there's kind of in some respects, a lot of junk on them. So taking out those unwanted items makes the stuff that's there stand out. And of course, I do a lot of gardening analogies. It's like weeding, taking out the weeds in your garden. It shows the flowers can show more. And like I said, the other things, and you just might need the space. If like I said, you can't expand, but you want to make a maker space or more meeting areas, you might have to downsize your collection a little bit. Like I said, you always want to keep your community's needs in mind. Those needs change, society changes, and the library's mission and goals may change as well. So this is all part of weeding. So this is just a visual. Would you all want yourselves to look like this? And the right answer is no. Or something more like this. I'm a bigger fan of the current picture than I am of the other. It's not particularly how I would do my library, but that's why they don't give me a library. But to me, the second picture is much more pleasing than the first. So, all right. And why we don't do it. We do have a tendency to become somewhat emotionally attached to our items in our library, and I'm the same. I'm the same way. We pretty much we work in libraries for the most part because we do love books, and also kind of like I equate this one with like my clothes in my closet. Someone might need it. I might be able to fit into it one of these days. And then, of course, a biggie, which, I mean, you don't want to make light of. It was bought with taxpayers' money. You do really, as you all know, want to be really cognizant about using taxpayers' money extremely wisely. Another one we sometimes get caught up on, it's a classic. Children today should read it. Which, in some cases, this is true. In some cases, it's not. You need to know about your children. I've mentioned classics to my children, and they would rather go jump in a lake full of leeches than read it. So, like I said, you got to keep that in mind. But that's not all kids. Those are, my two. But there's probably some others out there that feel the same way. Of course, with money being tight, sometimes you can't afford to replace it. So that's when you really need to decide, is that item, useful still to stay on your shelf? Or, can we really get rid of it even if we can't afford to replace it? It was donated by someone important. And again, this is a catch-22 because, like I said, there are, I know, people in the community that you all don't want to make upset or mad or something like that. Again, that's where in your collection development policies and procedures, you have a policy in there about donated items, but that's a whole nother webinar. But and then a biggie for a lot of people is, what if someone in the community found out? And it's very possible that they might. And we have yard work going on behind us. So if you hear a loud buzzing noise, that's what that is. I think the leaf blower's going now. So, and then the biggest one I think for a lot of us is we don't have the time. So that I think is a big one for all of us. We are so busy doing so many things that we don't have the time. But I need to stress to you all, unfortunately, we need to find the time to do it because nothing's going to get the community's attention quicker than, okay, he's right outside our window now. It's the leaf blower guy. Than doing a massive weed. People will notice if you're pulling large chunks of books off your shelf all at one time. So, in my opinion and what the literature seems to support is do it a little bit at a time. Little and continuous weeding is not as noticeable as a large project. And we've done large weeding projects at KDLA, and we have had to explain to people, and you do want to explain to people if they ask, of course, what's going on. But it's a lot less noticeable when you're doing a little bit at a time rather than having like 6 to 8 book trucks filled with books back in your stacks area. All right. So we've done our battle a little bit between we know we should do it, but we don't want to do it. So you just kind of have to come to terms, battle your demons, that it's just has to be done. And of course, patrons usually aren't happy about weeding. If they see it, they're wondering why you're getting rid of their books, and one of them might be one of their favorites. Mm-hmm. And it is uncomfortable to have to answer their questions. But I have some maybe not some suggestions of how you can answer some of their questions. Of course, some of them are real insistent. It might get really uncomfortable. But when you're going to read, particularly if you're going to weed and you're going to do a huge project, there's some things you need to do before you get started doing the actual weeding. And one of the things that was stressed about weeding is you need to communicate, and we'll talk about that here in a few things. But first, what you need to do, and this will help with just collection development in general, is doing a community and or collection needs assessment. Find out what your community wants. What do they want to see in their library? You can do this via paper surveys, online surveys. You can put an online survey out there on social media, your library website. You can do organized focus groups, get a group of, patrons together, sit down and talk about some of their needs and things like that. Of course, get a diverse group. You can talk to patrons that come in, and just kind of poll them informally. When you're out in the community, kind of ask people, like I said, what they really want to see, in their library, what they want you all to be buying and different things like that. And again, if you have this information to back up, why you're maybe weeding in a certain area because you're wanting to get new books because your community said they want a newer, better developed, animals, section or something like that. You have the data to back that up, and you can also explain that to patrons who are asking, well, why are you taking all the books out of this particular section? You can be like, well, they're outdated, and we've talked to the community, and they want more updated books in this area. And you can also take the opportunity to ask that person, what would you like to see, here in the library? So kind of, I think sometimes that's what, like we said, with this other lady, the lady that was responding in the editorial, I think it was more they were upset that they weren't informed about that this was going on. So sometimes, like I said, they weren't allowed to give their input. So sometimes people just want to give their input. So, and the second point here, collection development policy manual. I will beat this dead horse for as long as I possibly can. With almost everything you do in the library, everything you have in the library, please have a policy and a procedure for it. And this is definitely the case with weeding. Have a policy in place. Have this policy in your collection development policy manual. Your policy on weeding state, your criteria, your goals, your method, how you're going to go about it, what you're going to do with the material. Have it all there, so that not only the staff knows this is our policy and this is how we're going to proceed with it, but the public knows it as well. So, like I said, can't stress enough, have a policy and a procedure. But probably one of the biggest things with getting started when you're weeding. And this, um, I'll tell you, first off, we're going to talk about communication and buy-in from staff. This is something that, because not only does the public get upset sometimes about weeding, the staff can get upset about weeding as well. So it is something that you're going to have to stress to your staff. This is part of our job, and it is. It is your job as library staff to weed your collection. It is your professional responsibility to do this. So you might have some staff people that you got to get on board with that, and things like that, and communicate to your staff. Let them know this is what's going on, this is why we're doing it, and this is the end result. Communication with the public is also key, and this is whether you're doing a small weed. Like I said, you might have to answer individual questions from patrons that see, kind of what you're doing in the library, might come up to you and be like, well, what are you doing? Versus if you're going to do a big project, again, maybe getting the word out there soon. So if you, are going to get, if you're going to do a big project, definitely consider announcing it to the public. I'm not saying this is a must, but just consider it. Maybe announce it on the website, in a newsletter to local press. You need to tell the reason for why you're weeding things, how the process is going to work, how it will affect the patrons, that they may see some empty ranges, but that what we're doing is we're getting some newer materials in, replacements are going to be in such and such number of weeks, and then what's going to be done with the weeded material. That way you've already stated this up front, and possibly get some feedback on it. Now, if you're doing a small weed and the public comes up and has some questions, maybe try to think of some prepared answers for these possible questions, like, oh, we're making room for new materials, or we're trying to make the shelves easier to navigate. We're replacing outdated information with current information. You want to use, if you can, use positive statements and terms to let them know. Again, and it's a positive thing that you're doing. You're trying to make the collection better for the community. And one resource suggested possibly having on hand a good example or two of why libraries need to weed, materials. And there's a website at the end here. I think it's called Awful Books, and they have some good examples on there. They have libraries, turn in examples of some books that definitely should have been weeded a long, long time ago that you would not want a patron to come across in your collection. So another thing about getting started, the last one here, is what your criteria is going to be for taking things out of your collection. You just don't want to go at your collection willy-nilly pulling stuff. You want to have a rationalized, organized, thought-out system of why you're going to be pulling certain books. So, yeah, going after it willy-nilly would be. So this is just kind of to poke fun at this. I thought this was fun. Of course, this is from a school media person, but this is just an example of her criteria. She was going to pull any book that had a copyright date older than her mother-in-law. So again, this is an example of an astronomy book that probably should have been pulled a while back. Say, one day man will walk on the moon. So, of course, that happened a long time ago. So that's an example of a book that probably should have been weeded out of the collection a long time ago, because it is definitely not current and definitely not accurate. And sometimes what happens is if you don't regularly weed your collection, you have this problem this school media person ran into here, left me with almost no books. Because if you're not updating your collection on a regular basis and you go to weed, you might not have any more astronomy books, depending on when the last time was you weeded the astronomy books. And of course, with astronomy now, you got Pluto. Yep, see, there you go. Yeah. So you got the issue with Pluto because Pluto is no longer a planet anymore. So all of your books that talk about Pluto as a planet probably maybe need to be pulled. And
on Pluto.
I know, poor Pluto. I grew up when Pluto was a planet. So to me, Pluto will always be a planet, but I think now they consider it a planetoid. It's like a subplanet. So we recently had this debate here in the offices about whether Pluto was going to be reinstated as a planet again, and no, it's not. So
vote for it.
Yes, you can vote for it, but I don't think it. Now, here's a list here, and this list came from more of an academic standpoint because they talk about faculty, but still, it's a good kind of bulleted list to go down about when you're looking at what you're going to weed, kind of the things you need to consider. So, okay. Yes. Order a newer edition on the subject. Yes, that's what you need to do. All right, doing the weeding work. So, you've thought about what you need to do to get started, who you need to communicate it with. You need to find out what your community wants and different things like this, and you're deciding on your criteria. There's a few different ways you can do this, and that's always the fun part, is deciding how you want to do it. Criteria, also known as should I weed it. Now, one of the ways you can go about it is this acronym called Musty. And that might be how some of the books smell. You definitely want to probably look at the books that smell musty, because they've probably been in your collection for too long. But anyways, this acronym here just gives you some things to think about. First one there, misleading content, and of course, things being outdated, things not saying, haven't been kept up to date and accurate. Like I said, I cannot stress enough, this is so important in medical and legal. You do not want things on your shelf that are not current, that have misinformation in them. That is so dangerous. And then, ugly. Books that look like they have been through the shredder, shredder, a billion times. Y'all need to, please don't put those back on the shelf. Look at them, see if they need to be repaired or if they just need to be disposed of.
Sometimes you can get an updated edition.
Yes.
Of even fiction like that.
Yeah, you definitely can. So, like I said, look at the illustrations and art and see if they're dated. And then, like I said, but you also have to err on the side of caution and make sure it's not something historical. And then here's this one. If there's a newer edition or format of it, you might want to look into replacing it with the newer edition. Yeah, y'all just talked about that. Betty just did with the weeding nonfiction. And something, like you said, it doesn't have the best content for whatever reason. And don't take it personally. This could be something that somebody else selected years and years ago. So, like I said, you can also be like, well, I didn't pick this, thank goodness. Let's go. Let's get rid of it. So, and again, something irrelevant, doesn't relate to your community or your collection anymore. And something that, like you said, nobody's using it anymore. You might be able to get it through interlibrary loan somewhere else, so that it's something that you don't have to have on your shelf anymore. So that's the Musty criteria for deciding should it stay or should it go. And Kathy's now singing. I got her singing. So some other things to also consider, of course, is what the library's services are, what their goals are, what the community is wanting. Again, this goes back to availability of more suitable material, if you can replace it with newer editions, more updated books or things like that. And of course, like with all of us, we have to be realistic. Do we have the budget to be able to purchase more satisfactory items? And then this one's a little hard to explain. Relationship of a particular item to others on that subject. This would be, say, in some of the like Dewey categories, like if you need a balanced collection, like pros and cons, different things like that. You also want to make sure, again, when you're weeding, that your collection doesn't become unbalanced. That could be a bad thing. So low usage, if things just aren't getting used, if you have to dust like 3 layers of dust off of something, you might want to consider pulling it from your shelves because it's just not going anywhere. And with usage, of course, you can, most of you all with your integrated library system, ILS, you can run circulation reports and see. And sometimes they say, usually the standard is anywhere, if it hasn't circulated between 3 and 5 years, you might want to look at pulling it. And of course, that depends on if you're looking at fiction or looking at nonfiction, different things like that. You all need to decide what your criteria is going to be for your location.
I'm more stringent on nonfiction than I am fiction.
Yeah.
Because, some things people will still read.
There you go.
Fiction-wise.
Yeah. So, yeah, with fiction, like you said, it might be, that's fine. You jump in anytime. Like I said, Kathy and I, we haven't really been involved in like the actual weeding part of it. We've been more on the back end deprocessing, removing side because we were both. She's the cataloging supervisor, and I was currently and still is now, and I was in acquisitions but did cataloging stuff as well. So we had the tail end part of the weeding process. Yeah. So. And then another thing to consider is your library an archival or local history center. There might be, of course, some stuff that you're going to keep for forever because you all have an emphasis on being your local history center.
Genealogy rooms.
Yeah, genealogy rooms. Yeah. So, and then the possible future usefulness of a particular item. Of course, all of us can't see into the future, but some things, like, again, some of those classics and things like that are being made into movies. So, I mean, of course, I can't think of one right now from like maybe a classic back in my day. Is it Wrinkle in Time?
They're doing a Wrinkle in Time. That was
Wrinkle in Time. And that's one of those classics that I don't think has been very popular in recent years unless teachers assign it.
Yeah.
But, back in my day in the 80s, I think it was one of those that, everybody was reading. So you never know. Now, I wouldn't keep like 5 copies of it, but you might want to keep 1 or 2. But, of course, you never know what the future is going to do. So you can't keep everything. And then one reality these days is the availability of more current information on the internet. And I read somewhere that this is particularly true with medical information, that sometimes by the time the book gets to the shelf, it's already outdated. But of course, with the internet, you want to make sure that if your patrons ask you for help, that you give them the most reliable current information that you can. So, also some special considerations is there a particular subject or whatever that has local interest in your area? Is it by a local author or authors? Is it part of a special collection, or is it a rare book?
Yeah, Lois had a perfect example. The movie It came out, and everybody's reading it now.
Yes, and depending on it. No, I read it a long time ago, and I'm not going to go through it again. It's big. But again, that's one of those that I don't think anybody could have called, but it's Stephen King, so you might have kept a copy of it somewhere. And if you didn't, you can always buy, a new copy of it. So, like I said, you can't plan for everything. So, just do the best you can with everything. All right. So, method to doing weeding. There's some different ways that you can actually go about, pulling stuff off your shelves. You can do what I call the quick and dirty. Just look at your shelves and just pull stuff off, things that are, just worn. You got duplicates, things like that. This is something that can be done, just continuously. A good thing that you can do, and I know when I worked as a page in circulation, this would just like get me like nothing else. Items that were back on the shelf that were so awful and so falling apart. I'm like, who put this back on the shelf? So another thing that you can do weeding is when items are returned at the circulation desk, just look at them, and if they're falling apart, don't put them back on a cart to be reshelved. Set them aside somewhere, designated place to have, somebody look through it and be like, okay, well, do we need to repair this? Do we need to just withdraw it from the collection, or do we need to get a new copy of it? And then, of course, by use.
When I talk about book repair sometimes,
yes.
This is exactly what I tell them. You have to consider, is it really worth repairing?
Yes.
And then you go through these same type of procedures. You have to decide, can we just buy a new copy? Sometimes that's actually cheaper than some of the other stuff that you're going to do.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Kathy. Like I said, as Kathy was saying, with repairing something, you do have to consider staff time, the materials used, and how much that's going to cost versus just buying a new copy of it. So, yeah, that's very good to keep in mind. And some things just aren't repairable.
Exactly.
And if they are, you're pretty much putting the whole entire book back together, and that's not really a good use of anybody's time. So, so you've got, like I said, the quick and dirty, just the thing physically you can see, kind of with your eyes. By use, run your circulation report statistics, see what hasn't gone out in a while. And if you have some things that you think are still good quality materials but haven't really circulated well, we always call it the last ditch effort to get them out there, is kind of promote them and see if they do have some renewed interest in them, and kind of keep track of that. And if they still don't get checked out, you can be like, hey, you know what? I gave you another chance. You still didn't get checked out, so you got to go. So you can also, there's very detailed information. I have some links at the end. I just kind of gave some quick things to do. Is if you have, of course, if you use a Dewey Decimal System, you can also kind of use these guidelines even if you don't. Go through your, like your 100, your 200s, and decide based on criteria whether you're going to keep it or it's going to go. And then, of course, by section, your fiction, your biographies, even your movies, your audiobooks, different things like that. Cover everything. They all need to, like I said, be looked at for weeding. Now, going back to classification and bisection, which I will type this up and send this out to you all. And there is, like I said, a much more detailed, if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty version of this in the resources at the end. But by classification, when you're talking Dewey Decimal System, I'll just give you a brief overview. Like they suggest for the 000s, which is just general things. Do not keep encyclopedias for more than 5 years. Even if I don't know if anybody's keeping encyclopedias anymore in the 000s, but if you are, that's okay. But don't keep them for longer than 5 years. Computer books, don't keep them any longer than 3 years. Library science books, you can keep them as long as they're current enough to be useful. So again, that's one of those things that you're going to have to decide. Are they still useful? If you have any AACR2 cataloging books, they're probably not very useful anymore. Let them go. Everything's mostly RDA now. So, all right, in your 100s, which is philosophy and psychology, your popular books in that area and your self-help, maybe keep for about 5 to 8 years. Again, depending, you can almost, let them go sooner. You do want to consider keeping some of the scholarly works like the classics in psychology and philosophy by important authors. So don't necessarily keep everything. Of course, again, self-help is one of those sometimes too in pop psychology that it's trendy. So anything that's trendy, like I said, you might want to get, some of those satisfy your patrons, but it's not something you probably want to keep forever and ever. So 200s, religion and mythology. Or of course with this particular subject, you want to make sure that you have things that reflect the interests of the community. They do consider keeping something current on each of the major religions. And then 300, social sciences. They suggest getting a new almanac every year. If this is where you keep your almanac, some people keep it in their ready reference. Um, this is where law materials fall under. Make sure these are definitely as current as you possibly can. If they are not current or out of date, get rid of them. Um, and again, particularly with social sciences, you want to make sure that you do have a balanced and current collection in this particular area, especially with controversial topics. You want to make sure that you don't have too many books on one side and not the other. So that's where that balanced collection comes in. 400s with the languages. They suggest a fairly current dictionary for each of the major languages, and of course, whatever is spoken in your community. I don't know if anybody ever looks at dictionaries, foreign language dictionaries anymore. So that's just kind of see what the usage is at your library. 500s, pure sciences. Retain basic historical works, but everything else in this area, you definitely want to keep it updated. And this, of course, this is, I think, where your medical. No.
Medical's in 600s.
600s. It's been a long time since I've had to do the Dewey Decimal System. That's bad. 600s, applied sciences. Of course, keep the 610s, which is medical, to a minimum. Now, this is where they're saying here, not because they're saying now that by the time medical books get to the shelf, they're already outdated, that you don't want too many of them. You want to rely on electronic resources to give patrons the most current and up-to-date information, which I didn't realize that until researching this. I was like, well, that kind of makes sense. Of course, you want to keep updated your dieting books, cookbooks, and then business practices fall within here, which I always thought was weird, but Dewey Decimal's quirky like that sometimes. Particularly dieting and stuff, those usually, of course, sometimes rotate around what's popular now, or fad diets. So, like I said, you might want those for your patrons, but after the fad kind of wears away. That helps if I connect. Okay, how about now? Sound now. Our internet dropped.
Okay.
And I had to turn my microphone back on because I didn't notice it. Okay. See, just when I was getting to the literature part, it decided to drop. And I need to speed it up just a little bit. Okay. For 800s in literature, if you have multiple copies of classics, keep the best, most recent edition, move the rest of them to fiction, or just get them out of there, weed them if you need to. Maybe for some things you might just want a anthology, literary anthology. That way it has a selection of some things. They suggest only one copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. You don't have to have, because they should be all the same, so only one copy of everything. And then buy the paperback version of popular plays. So, for the 900s, history, travel, and geography, they say to look at the history books, look at them for demand, accuracy, and interpretation, because those things have changed over the years. My kids are telling me all the time about new stuff they learned in history. We have a conversation the other day about Christopher Columbus and the Vikings and the Paleo Indians and how that has changed over time. So, travel and geography books, if y'all still purchase travel guides for this collection print version, don't keep them for more than 3 years unless they have a significant background information. With biographies, once popularity passes, you might want to only keep one copy of whoever's biography it is. Fiction, this was kind of different for adult and children's. For adult, of course, you just definitely check if you have multiple copies of a title that's no longer popular. You might want to consider keeping the bestsellers, but you might want to think about, okay, bestsellers from the past 5 years. After that, might not want to keep all of them. See who checks out the most at your library. Um, Popular authors, things like that. For children's books, when you're looking at your picture books, in weeding, you want to look at books that have good stories and illustrations. Um, and then for young adults, particularly fiction, what they suggest to do with young adult nonfiction and children's nonfiction is kind of follow your Dewey policy for adult. But for young adult and juvenile fiction, of course, in nonfiction and even possibly in fiction, um, want to get rid of outdated topics. You might want to weed any of the abridged versions of anything. Um, and you don't have to keep all award books. If award books, it might be sacrosanct, but if they don't circulate, there's no law that requires you to keep all the awards books. So if no one's checking it out, you don't necessarily have to keep it. And of course, as many of y'all know that deal with young adults, paperback is the preferred format. So I know when my kids get a hardback, they're like, "Oh my gosh, it's like the end of the world." So, but they will read it if they have to. Um, of course, with reference collections have become almost extremely small, but you still want to make sure everything there is current and accurate. For AV materials, you need to weed those too. You need to make sure that you can also look at those similar to how you weed your print materials. Of course, if you have an AV material that's broken,
get rid of it.
Get rid of it. That's an easy one. For magazines and newspapers, mainly this one is you just need to decide on your retention, whether you're going to keep back issues for a year and then get rid of them all, or how you're going to do that. So we'll continue on with methods. The crew method is a popular one that's been around for quite a bit. Texas developed this, and this crew stands for continuous, review things, evaluate it, and then weeding. And basically what it is, the crew method is you take that Musty acronym into consideration, plus you look at the copyright or the publication date and the last checkout date, and that's your method or criteria for weeding, is using the crew method. And you can do this in combination with the next thing if you have it down pat, is kind of my approach. And this is something, like I said, that you can do if you're doing a continuous weeding on a regular basis. Is this was from a school media librarian, the 15-minute to a better collection process. And basically, you just pick a section and just pull out books that looks like they might be weeded, put them on a cart, look at them later, and but not too much later. Apply your method of weeding and criteria and decide whether you're going to weed it or not. And then take the books, take them out of the catalog, deprocess them, and then decide what to do with them. So, and this 15-minute process, of course, is going to actually take 15 minutes if you know what your method and criteria are off the top of your head. So that's a way to do that. So, logistics when you're looking at weeding, might want to work in a 2-person team. And this, I think, comes in real handy, say, for someone like me who likes to throw everything away versus someone that likes to keep everything. No, Kathy's good. Kathy's, like I said, is a good balance to me because, she'll she'll make me see, oh, this is probably why we need to keep this, or it's a good idea we keep this. So you don't want two people that are going to fight with each other, but two people that are good balance to each other. So I don't know, unless you want people fighting, which I wouldn't suggest. You're weeding number one, and you're in a public space. So people that fight, you probably don't want them out there in public doing that. So do small sections at a time. Also, something you can sneak in here is shelf read as you go to make sure everything is where it should be. That way, when you're looking for stuff later on, it's right on the shelf where it's supposed to be. Um, and then go ahead to save on confusion. Finish each section before you move on to the next one. Also suggest only weed for an hour at a time. I think much more than this, you start making not the greatest decisions and you kind of get bored with it and stuff like that. So maybe just like I said, schedule to weed for only an hour at a time, and then go back to the next day in a couple days, whatever. Um, you might want to look at choosing a time when there's little traffic, so that you're not in anyone's way, and quite frankly, so that no one is in your way too. So that one works both ways. Um, with weeding, it can be, a lot of movement, a lot of bending, a lot of stooping. So definitely be comfortable, wear comfortable clothes while you're doing it. And before you set out to weed, have all your materials gathered together. So you ask, what might those materials be? One of the things that, and I think we just kind of wrote this on a piece of paper, but you can also type it up, make it more, a little bit more uniform, is a book flag form that has options on it. And this is like you can just take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and cut it into strips and have something typed up on each of them like this. That way, whoever's doing the weeding can mark one of these choices, put any notes down here that whoever is going to finally be looking at all those weeded books can know what to do with it. Um, you know, for anything that you're doing, you probably want to take a book truck or book trucks, depending on how big your project is. If you're going to be looking at your circulation reports to see, pulling off stuff based on, if they haven't circulated in a while, you definitely want to take your circulation reports with you. Excuse me. Shelf place markers come in handy because if there's a team that's going to be coming in behind you, they will know where to pick up where you left off. So you might want to designate something as a shelf place marker. Post-it notes in case you need to put any notes on the shelves themselves, or if you're not using the book flag, you might want to put a post-it note on the front of the book with any special instructions. Then, of course, pens or pencils to write stuff down with. So that'll help. And I'm so sorry. I've been talking apparently for too long because I have a tickle in my throat. But I'm almost done. So the big thing after you weed is what to do with all of your books that you've taken out of your collection. Like Kathy and I said before, some of them you can try to repair, but again, really decide whether it's really worth repairing them, or you're just going to replace it with another with a new copy or an updated copy. You can do a book sale if you have a friends of the library. They can do a book sale for you. You might possibly, if the books aren't in too terrible condition or not too terribly outdated, you can donate them to an organization. You might want to be careful, though, about this one. Look into your policies. I know since we are a state agency, we only have certain people that we can donate our books to. They have to be another state agency or a division of state government. So say we can donate our books to you all, but we can't say donate them to a nursing home because our requirements as a state agency is we do have to give them to another state-funded institution. Some libraries will resell their books, so an online bookseller. An example they have here is Better World Books. At the end of this, in one of the resources, ALA has a list of some online booksellers to use. If you're going to go this route, I would definitely research the company, make sure they're a reputable company that you're using, because again, this is one of the things that some public libraries have gotten in trouble with the public before, is reselling those books, and who was doing the reselling and where that money in those books were going to. The other thing you can do is recycle and reuse. Um, and recycle can be, that's what we try to do with some of our books, is recycle them if we can't, donate them to anybody. And it's not the same, not quite the same thing as just throwing them in the dumpster, which is dispose of. They do actually recycle the books. Now, you can also recycle the books and do what, of course, they call the popular upcycling, or make crafts out of them. And there's an organization called Recycled Reads that's got some, this is also in one of the ALA sources too, of different crafts and stuff you can do with the book. So that's another thing that you can do with them. And then, like you said, some of them you're just going to have to dispose of. You definitely want to make sure that physically the book has been deprocessed, that anything identifying your library has been scratched through with like a dark permanent black marker so that you can't tell what it is. So you want to take all identification off of them. You might even want to have a withdrawal stamp that's stamped on there so that if anybody finds it, they definitely know it wasn't just thrown out willy-nilly. It was actually, has that withdrawn stamp on it, and just take off any of your identification. Now, this last part is something that for the good of cataloging and the good of Kathy.
Make sure you remove it from your ILS.
Yeah.
And if you are a member of OCLC or you submit your holdings to OCLC for updating, make sure you have those removed also. It helps with your ILL. So, and after you have weeded, you may want to do an inventory of your collection. So.
Yeah, and that way you know exactly what you have when you do an inventory. But yes, make sure that things get taken out of your library catalog, and if you are a contributing member to OCLC, that they are taken out of there. Because, yeah, I admit we've let things slip through the cracks before. Rare, but we would have somebody wanting to place an ILL for something that OCLC said was still in our collection, but really wasn't, because we weeded it but forgot to get it taken out of OCLC. So, all right. And with that, it is 10:59, and we are done. I'm going to send y'all some more information in an email. But here's last two slides are just some resources that I used to help me create this PowerPoint. No, I don't have that in here. So, and I don't have the pod download, but I will send that out to you all in an email. I'm just looking through my notes, make sure I didn't forget anything. If I did, I will definitely send that to you all. But I hope this has been useful today and given you all a start on weeding. Thank you all for joining us. And I just want to say, like I said, don't be afraid to weed. It's a necessary thing. It needs to be done. Just be smart about it. Know exactly why you're weeding, what you're going to weed. And the best advice I can give you is try to avoid making weeding a major project. Make time to do it a little at a time. It'll be better for you all, and it'll be better for your patrons. Is try to not do it as a big project. Just do it a little bit at a time. Do it continuously. And hopefully it'll make life better for everyone. So, want to thank y'all again for joining us. When you're ready to exit, just click that X in the upper right-hand corner. And again, appreciate y'all being here with us today. Have a good rest of the week, and hopefully we will see you all later. Oh, and if you have any other questions or comments, definitely put those in the chat. Ken and I will hang around here for a few more minutes. So thank you all again.